The clock on her dashboard read 2:18 a.m. as Special Agent Meredith Chen rubbed her tired eyes. She'd been awake for nearly 20 hours straight, hidden in a cramped van outside a warehouse where she watched men in expensive suits come and go with briefcases. 18 hours of surveillance photos, notes, and coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Just 15 more minutes, she whispered to herself, turning up the radio to stay alert. The late-night drive home stretched before her on the empty country road, the yellow lines seeming to blur together in the headlights of her plain, government-issued sedan. Meredith rolled down her window, letting the cool night air hit her face. The case was big, possibly the biggest of her career. 6 months of tracking money being washed through local businesses, all leading back to one man who thought he was untouchable. She smiled thinking about the look that would be on his face when the cuffs finally went on. Her eyelids grew heavy as the road curved gently around a hill. The car drifted slightly, crossing over the yellow line for just a moment before she jerked the wheel back. That's when she saw them, the red and blue lights flashing in her rearview mirror. "You've got to be kidding me," she groaned, pulling over to the shoulder and watching as the county sheriff's patrol car stopped behind her. This was the last thing she needed tonight. Meredith reached for her purse to grab her badge, but as her fingers searched the bag, a knot formed in her stomach. Her FBI credentials weren't there. In her exhaustion after the long surveillance shift, she'd left them locked in her desk drawer at the field office. The beam of a flashlight swept across her back window as the officer approached. Meredith took a deep breath. This would be simple enough to explain. "License and registration, please," came a deep voice as Deputy Sheriff John Calloway leaned down to her window. He was young, probably new to the force, with a clean-shaven face and a uniform so crisp it could have been his first week on patrol. "Good evening, officer," Meredith said, trying to sound alert as she handed over her driver's license. "I know I drifted over the line back there. I've been working all day and night, and I'm just trying to get home." The deputy studied her license with a frown. "Ms. Chen, have you been drinking tonight?" "No, absolutely not," she said firmly. "Look, there's something you should know. I'm actually an FBI agent. I've been on surveillance for a federal case, and I'm heading home from work." The deputy's expression changed, but not in the way she expected. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. "FBI? Do you have credentials with you, ma'am?" Meredith sighed. "That's the problem. I left my badge at the office. But if you call the Portland field office, they can confirm my identity." She realized how this sounded as soon as the words left her mouth. "Step out of the vehicle, please," he said, his hand moving to rest on his holster. "Officer, I understand how this looks, but—" "Ma'am, I need you to step out of the vehicle now." The exhaustion that had been weighing on her all night suddenly gave way to a surge of frustration. This was not happening, not after the day she had. Meredith slowly opened her door and stepped out onto the gravel shoulder. The deputy towered over her 5'4" frame, his flashlight beam now pointed at her face. "Turn around and place your hands on the vehicle," he instructed. "This is completely unnecessary," she protested, but complied anyway. "In my glove compartment, there's paperwork for the car showing it's registered to the federal government." The deputy ignored her, instead patting down her sides and checking for weapons. Finding none, he glanced through the car windows, where his flashlight beam caught the edge of her surveillance equipment case in the backseat. "What's in the case?" he demanded. "Photography equipment," she answered truthfully, though not completely. "Listen, Officer Calloway, I understand you're doing your job, but so am I, if you just call." "I've heard enough," he cut her off, pulling out his handcuffs. "Claiming to be a federal agent is a serious offense. Until we can verify your identity, I'm detaining you." The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked around her wrists as Meredith stared in disbelief at the starry night sky above. After months of building this case, after the endless hours and missed weekends, she was being arrested on the side of a country road by a deputy who thought she was lying. What Meredith didn't know was that this embarrassing moment was just the beginning of a night that would change both their lives forever. The back seat of Deputy Calloway's patrol car smelled like pine air freshener and fast food. Meredith shifted uncomfortably, the handcuffs digging into her wrists as the car bounced along the country road. Through the mesh divider, she could see the deputy glancing at her in the rearview mirror every few seconds. I'm telling you, this is a huge mistake, Meredith said, trying to keep her voice calm and reasonable. I've been with the Bureau for 10 years. Just call the field office. Ma'am, do you know how many people try to impersonate federal agents? Calloway replied, his eyes meeting hers in the mirror. We'll sort this out at the station. Meredith leaned her head against the cool window, watching the trees pass by in the darkness. She thought about the surveillance photos sitting in her equipment case, evidence that had taken months to gather. If those got into the wrong hands or were mishandled by the local police, her whole case could fall apart. The patrol car pulled into a small sheriff's station, a brick building with bright fluorescent lights pouring from the windows despite the late hour. Usually, small-town stations like this would be nearly empty at 3 a.m., but tonight, the parking lot was half full. What's going on here? Meredith asked as Calloway opened the back door to help her out. Countywide training exercise, he explained briefly. You picked an interesting night to get yourself arrested. As they walked through the front doors, heads turned. A room full of deputies and officers from various local departments stared at them. Some were in uniform, others in civilian clothes with coffee cups in hand. All of them looked curiously at Meredith in handcuffs. "What have you got there, John?" asked an older deputy with a thick gray mustache. "Woman claimed she's FBI," Calloway announced, a hint of pride in his voice. "No badge, no credentials, but she's got some fancy equipment in her car and a story about surveillance." The room's interest level immediately spiked. Several officers moved closer, forming a loose circle around Meredith. She felt like an exhibit at a zoo. "I am an FBI agent," Meredith insisted, looking around the room. "My credentials are at the Portland field office. Call my supervisor, Agent Tom Wilson. He'll confirm everything." A heavy-set man in a wrinkled uniform chuckled. "Portland office won't be answering calls at this hour, honey." Meredith bristled at the condescending tone. "They have a 24-hour duty desk. The number is 503-555-6700. Her specificity seemed to give a few of the officers pause, but the atmosphere in the room remained one of amused skepticism. "Let's get her processed," said Calloway, guiding her toward a desk in the corner. "Sheriff Bauman's on his way in. He'll want to handle this one personally." Meredith's heart sank. The last thing she needed was a small-town sheriff trying to make a name for himself with her case. As Calloway removed one handcuff to secure her to the metal desk, she noticed officers picking through her belongings on a nearby table. "Hey, you need a warrant to go through my things," she protested, watching as one deputy tried to open her equipment case. "This case is locked," he announced. "What are you hiding in here?" "Surveillance equipment, like I said," Meredith replied, growing increasingly frustrated. "And it's federal property. You don't have the authority to open it." Another officer held up her cell phone. "No password? That's surprising for a so-called federal agent." "It's a work phone with biometric security," Meredith said through gritted teeth. "It only opens with my fingerprint." The officers exchanged glances, slightly impressed despite themselves. One of them, a young woman with her hair pulled back in a tight bun, approached Meredith. "If you're really FBI, why were you driving so late at night alone? Don't you people work in teams?" It was a good question, one that showed this officer at least had some knowledge of federal procedures. Meredith seized the opportunity. "We do work in teams. My partner David was with me all day. He dropped me at my car when our shift ended. Call him, David Wong, same office." For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed Deputy Calloway's face. He'd been standing nearby, listening to the exchange. Before he could respond, the front doors swung open and a tall man with silver hair and a county sheriff's uniform entered, bringing with him a blast of cold night air and an unmistakable aura of authority. "So," he said, smiling broadly as he surveyed the room and spotted Meredith. "I hear we've caught ourselves an FBI agent. This ought to be interesting." Sheriff Bauman walked across the room with the confident stride of someone used to being the most important person wherever he went. His silver hair was perfectly combed, and despite being called in from home at this late hour, his uniform looked freshly pressed. He stopped in front of Meredith, looking down at her with an expression somewhere between amusement and suspicion. "Well, well," he said, folding his arms across his chest. "I hear you've been telling my deputies quite a story tonight." Meredith straightened her back, refusing to be intimidated. "It's not a story, Sheriff. I'm Special Agent Meredith Chen with the FBI's Organized Crime Division. This is all a misunderstanding that could be cleared up with one phone call." The sheriff pulled up a chair, turning it backward before sitting down to face her. It was a move Meredith had seen countless times in interrogation rooms, an attempt to seem casual while establishing dominance. "You know," Bauman said, his voice carrying through the now quiet room, "in my 30 years of law enforcement, I've encountered 3 people who claimed to be FBI agents." He held up 3 fingers for emphasis. Not one of them was telling the truth. One was running a scam on elderly folks. Another was trying to intimidate witnesses in a local case. The third, he chuckled, well, he just liked the way people treated him when they thought he had a badge. Officers around the room laughed on cue, like an audience at their boss's favorite joke. "I understand your skepticism," Meredith replied evenly. "But I've given you names and numbers to call. I've explained that my credentials are at the office. What exactly are you waiting for?" The sheriff's smile faded slightly. "What I'm waiting for, Ms. Chen, if that's your real name, is for you to drop the act and tell us what you're really up to. We found surveillance equipment in your car. Who were you watching, and why?" One of the deputies stepped forward, holding up Meredith's notebook. "She's got addresses written down. Local addresses." Meredith felt a flash of panic. That notebook contained information about her investigation, locations tied to the money laundering operation she'd been tracking for months. "That's official FBI business," she said firmly. "You have no right to go through that." The sheriff leaned in closer. "City, that's where you're wrong. If you're not really FBI, and I don't think you are, then that's just evidence. And I'm very interested in why you've been taking notes on businesses in my county." Around the room, Meredith could see the officers watching with interest. Some looked convinced of her guilt, while others seemed less certain. The female deputy who had asked the intelligent question earlier was now flipping through Meredith's driver's license and other ID cards they'd taken from her wallet. "Her story checks out in some ways," the deputy said, looking up. "Her driver's license matches the name she gave. Her business cards say FBI, though anyone could print those. And her car registration does show government plates." Sheriff Bauman waved his hand dismissively. "Decent forgeries, I'm sure. But let's dig deeper." He turned back to Meredith. "If you're really who you say you are, you won't mind waiting while we verify, right? Could take hours, of course. Maybe even until morning when we can reach someone at this Portland office you mentioned." Meredith felt her patience reaching its limit. "Sheriff, I've been awake for nearly 24 hours. I've spent most of that time conducting surveillance for a federal investigation. I'm tired, I'm frustrated, and I'm still handcuffed to a desk in your station. This is becoming harassment." The sheriff's eyebrows shot up. "Harassment? That's a strong word from someone who can't prove she is who she claims to be." Just then, the front door of the station swung open, and a breathless deputy hurried in. "Sheriff, we found something interesting in her car." He held up Meredith's equipment case, which had finally been pried open. "You're going to want to see this." The room fell silent as the sheriff took the case. Meredith felt her heart sink. Months of work, detailed surveillance photos, notes on suspects. All of it was now in the hands of a small-town sheriff with something to prove. And worse, if word got back to any of her targets that the FBI was watching them, the entire operation could be blown. Sheriff Bauman opened the case slowly, his eyes widening at what he saw inside. He looked up at Meredith, his expression completely changed. "Well," he said quietly, "this just got a whole lot more interesting." All eyes in the station were fixed on Sheriff Bauman as he examined the contents of Meredith's equipment case. He pulled out a stack of high-resolution photographs, flipping through them slowly. "These are surveillance photos," he said, his voice losing some of its earlier cockiness. "Professional grade." Meredith watched as he pulled out a small recording device, several memory cards, and finally, a folder with typed reports bearing government letterhead. The sheriff's face grew more serious with each item. "Still think I'm lying?" Meredith asked quietly. Sheriff Bauman ignored her question, instead turning to address the room. "I need to look through these materials more carefully. Everyone back to your training exercises. Deputy Calloway, you stay." The crowd of officers dispersed reluctantly, throwing curious glances over their shoulders as they returned to their tasks. Soon, only the sheriff, Deputy Calloway, and the female deputy who had examined Meredith's IDs remained. "Sheriff," the female deputy began hesitantly, "maybe we should call the number she gave us for the Portland field office." "Not yet, Lisa," he replied sharply. "I want to know exactly what we're dealing with first." The sheriff spread the surveillance photos across an empty desk. They showed various men entering and exiting buildings, exchanging briefcases, and meeting in parked cars. Meredith recognized her targets, members of the money laundering ring she'd been investigating. Her stomach tightened as she watched the sheriff's hands touch evidence that could make or break her case. "These men," Sheriff Bauman said, pointing to a photo, "I know them. That's Robert Keller and Pete Dawson. They own the Lakeview Resort." He looked up at Meredith with newfound interest. "Why is the FBI watching local businessmen?" Meredith weighed her options carefully. If she revealed too much about her investigation, it could compromise months of work. But she needed to give them something to establish her credibility. "Those men are persons of interest in an ongoing federal investigation," she said firmly. "That's all I can share without proper authorization." The sheriff leaned against the desk, studying her face. "You know, if you are who you said you are, I still don't appreciate federal agents operating in my county without giving my office the courtesy of a heads-up." "It's a need-to-know operation," Meredith replied, tugging slightly at the handcuff that still secured her to the desk. "And with all due respect, Sheriff, your department wasn't on that list." Sheriff Bauman's face flushed slightly. He opened his mouth to respond when his phone rang. He checked the screen, frowned, and answered. "Sheriff Bauman." His expression changed as he listened. "Yes, she's here." "Claiming to be FBI." "Yes, sir. I understand." "Yes, sir, right away." He ended the call and looked at Meredith with a mixture of annoyance and uncertainty. "That was Judge Reynolds. Says he got a call from someone claiming to be an FBI supervisor in Portland. Wants to know why we're holding one of his agents." A flicker of relief passed over Meredith's face. Someone at the field office must have noticed she hadn't checked in. "Sounds like your story might have some truth to it," the sheriff admitted reluctantly. "But I'm not convinced yet. Could be your accomplices making calls." Meredith's patience finally snapped. 3 hours handcuffed to a desk, her case materials exposed, and now even outside confirmation wasn't enough. "This has gone too far," she said, her voice rising. "You've detained a federal agent, interfered with an ongoing investigation, and compromised sensitive evidence. When my supervisor arrives, and believe me, he's already on his way, you'll have a lot of explaining to do." Just as the words left her mouth, Meredith spotted something that made her heart leap. Her jacket had been tossed onto a nearby chair when they searched her, and from this angle, she could see something poking out from an inner pocket, the corner of her emergency backup credentials. FBI agents were taught to keep a spare ID in case their primary credentials were lost or damaged. Meredith had forgotten about her backup, tucked into a hidden pocket of her jacket months ago. As Sheriff Bauman continued to flip through her surveillance photos, muttering to himself, Meredith's mind raced. If she could just reach her jacket, this entire humiliating ordeal could end. Her eyes met Deputy Lisa's, who had been watching her intently. The female deputy followed Meredith's gaze to the jacket, then back to Meredith's face. Something passed between them, an unspoken understanding. With the sheriff distracted, Deputy Lisa casually moved toward the chair, adjusting her utility belt as she went. Deputy Lisa casually moved toward the chair where Meredith's jacket lay. With a supple movement, she picked up the jacket as if examining it, positioning herself so her body blocked the sheriff's view. "Interesting fabric," Lisa commented loudly enough for the sheriff to hear. "Pretty high-end for a fake agent." Sheriff Bauman barely looked up from the surveillance photos. "Add it to the evidence pile," he muttered, still trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Lisa nodded and turned away, but not before her eyes met Meredith's again. In a movement so smooth it could have been accidental, she draped the jacket over the back of the chair closest to Meredith's desk, close enough that if Meredith stretched, her fingertips might just reach it. Meredith understood immediately. She shifted in her seat, making the handcuffs rattle slightly to cover the sound as she extended her free arm as far as it would go. Her fingers brushed against the edge of the jacket, not quite there. Sheriff, Deputy Calloway spoke up, providing an unintentional distraction. What about these notes? They reference some property deals at the Lakeview Resort. The sheriff moved to examine the notes, his back now turned to Meredith. It was the opportunity she needed. With one desperate stretch, she grabbed the edge of her jacket and pulled it closer, her fingers diving into the hidden inner pocket. There it was, the hard plastic case of her backup FBI credentials. Just as her fingers closed around the ID, Sheriff Bauman turned back toward her. Now about these property records, he began, then stopped abruptly, sitting the jacket on the desk beside Meredith. What's going on here? Meredith took a deep breath and pulled out her FBI badge and ID card, holding it up where everyone could see it. The gold emblem caught the fluorescent light of the station. Special Agent Meredith Chen, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Organized Crime Division, she announced clearly, her voice carrying across the now silent room. I'd appreciate it if someone would remove these handcuffs. Now. The sheriff's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again like a fish out of water. Deputy Calloway froze, his face draining of color as he stared at the official credentials. Even Lisa, who had helped Meredith, looked genuinely surprised at the official badge. That could be fake, Sheriff Bauman stammered, but the uncertainty in his voice was clear. Check the holographic seal and the embedded microchip, Meredith replied coolly. Standard issue for all federal agents since 2015. You're welcome to call the number on the back to verify. Though I believe Judge Reynolds already tried to tell you who I am. The sheriff took the credentials with trembling hands, examining them closely. The room remained perfectly still as he pulled out his phone and dialed the verification number on the back of the ID. After a moment, he spoke into the phone. Yes, I'm calling to verify FBI credentials for a Meredith Chen. He paused, listening. Badge number JTT 35271. Another pause. I see. Yes. Thank you. He hung up and looked at Meredith with an expression that had completely transformed from smug authority to something approaching fear. Remove those handcuffs, he ordered Calloway, who fumbled with the keys in his haste to comply. As the metal cuffs fell away from her wrist, Meredith slowly stood up, rubbing the red mark where they had dug into her skin. She was shorter than most of the officers in the room, but somehow she seemed to tower over them now. My equipment, please, she said, extending her hand. The sheriff quickly gathered her surveillance photos and notes, practically shoving them back into the case. Agent Chen, I want to express our sincerest apologies for this misunderstanding. We were simply doing our duty to. Save it, Meredith cut him off. What you've done tonight isn't just a misunderstanding. It's interference with a federal investigation that's been ongoing for 6 months. The officers in the room exchanged nervous glances. Deputy Calloway looked like he might be sick. Agent Chen, Lisa spoke up, if there's anything we can do to make this right. There is, Meredith replied, her voice level and professional. You can start by explaining why nobody at this station thought to properly verify my identity before parading me around like a criminal and going through federal evidence without authorization. She reclaimed her jacket and put it on, feeling more like herself with each passing second. The officers watched her in stunned silence, the reality of their situation beginning to sink in. I'll need to use your phone, Meredith continued, straightening her collar. My supervisor needs to be updated on this situation immediately. Sheriff Bauman nodded quickly, gesturing toward his office. Of course. Use mine. It's private. As Meredith walked toward the sheriff's office, every eye in the station followed her. The whispers had already begun. They had handcuffed an FBI agent, and now they were all going to pay the price. Dawn was breaking outside the station windows as Meredith finished her phone call in Sheriff Bauman's office. She had been on the phone for nearly 40 minutes, explaining the situation to her supervisor, Agent Wilson. His reaction had ranged from disbelief to anger to grim amusement. By the end, they had agreed on a course of action. When Meredith emerged from the office, the atmosphere in the station had completely changed. The officers who had been so confident hours earlier now moved around like nervous schoolchildren, avoiding eye contact with her. Sheriff Bauman sat at his desk, filling out paperwork with unusual focus. My supervisor will be here in about an hour, Meredith announced, her voice cutting through the tense silence. along with the assistant director of our field office. Sheriff Bauman's pen stopped moving. He looked up, his face pale. The assistant director. Is that necessary? Apparently, detaining a federal agent and compromising surveillance evidence warrants attention from higher up, Meredith replied coolly. She checked her watch. I need coffee. Real coffee, not whatever's been sitting in that pot all night. Deputy Lisa immediately straightened up. There's a diner across the street. I can run and get you some. Meredith nodded. Blacked, 2 sugars, and something to eat would be appreciated. As Lisa hurried out, Deputy Calloway approached cautiously, holding Meredith's car keys and phone. Your belongings, Agent Chen, he said, placing them on the desk without meeting her eyes. I've brought your car around front. I also filled your tank. Meredith took her things without comment. The young deputy lingered, clearly wanting to say more. Look, he finally blurted out, I was just doing my job. You were driving erratically. You couldn't provide credentials. You were doing your job at first. Meredith cut him off. Pulling me over was reasonable, but the moment I asked you to call my office to verify my identity, you had options. You chose to escalate instead. The deputy's shoulders slumped. This is going to end my career, isn't it? Before Meredith could answer, the station door swung open. A middle-aged man in a rumpled suit entered, followed by 2 agents in FBI windbreakers. The room fell completely silent. Agent Chen, the man in the suit, called out, his stern face breaking into relief when he spotted her. Tom, Meredith greeted her supervisor with a tired smile. That was fast. We were already on the road when you called. Part of the team was heading in for the morning briefing. Agent Wilson looked around the station with a critical eye. So these are the folks who thought it was a good idea to detain you for half the night. Sheriff Bauman stood up quickly, extending his hand. Sheriff Alan Bauman, sir. There's been an unfortunate misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? Wilson repeated, ignoring the outstretched hand. You detained a federal agent for over 4 hours, interfered with a 6-month investigation, and handled classified surveillance materials without authorization. That's not a misunderstanding, Sheriff. That's a problem. One of the agents in windbreakers approached Meredith. You okay? She asked quietly. I'm fine, Judy, Meredith assured her. Tired and annoyed, but fine. Agent Wilson turned to address the room. Here's what's going to happen. My team is going to conduct interviews with everyone involved in this incident. We'll need statements from all officers who interacted with Agent Chen. Sheriff, we'll start with you. The morning sun was streaming through the windows now, illuminating dust particles in the air as the local officers sat at their desks, waiting nervously to be interviewed. Meredith watched as her colleagues set up in different corners of the station, each taking a local officer aside. Deputy Lisa returned with coffee and a bag of breakfast sandwiches, handing them to Meredith with an apologetic smile. I got extra in case your team was hungry too. Thanks, Meredith said, taking a grateful sip of the hot coffee. You know, you're the only one here who showed any real police instinct tonight. Lisa looked surprised. What do you mean? You questioned my story, but you also examined the evidence objectively. And you helped me get to my badge when you realized I might be telling the truth. Meredith studied the young deputy thoughtfully. The FBI runs task forces with local departments sometimes. Officers with good judgment are always needed. Lisa's eyes widened slightly, but before she could respond, Agent Wilson called Meredith over. Chen, I need you to walk me through your case files again. If these yahoos compromised anything, we need to know exactly what and how badly. As Meredith joined her supervisor, she caught Sheriff Bauman watching her with a mixture of embarrassment and resentment. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for certain. No one in this station would ever mistake her for anything other than what she was, an FBI agent who didn't take kindly to being handcuffed.